Welcome to the MarTech.org podcast.
This episode was recorded live during the Spring 2024 MarTech Conference. Enjoy.
Welcome, everybody, to the Coffee Talk on modern email marketing. I am Natalie Jackson. I'm the Director of Demand Generation at CBIZ, also the co-host and co-founder of the podcast Humans of Email with my dear friend, Jim Capstraw. We hope you enjoyed yesterday's sessions. If you missed any, you can always enjoy the recordings. And this is Brian McKenna, who's going to be here with me today. Brian, tell us about yourself.
Thanks, Natalie. And I'm Brian McKenna. I'm the VP of CRM at DMi Partners, which is a digital agency based out of Philadelphia. So I'm super excited to be here as well. Excited to talk email.
Well, we do have some polls today, and actually it might be kind of fun for us to start off with one. So, Brian, we can access the polls down there. And for all of you who are here, would love to know what is your affiliation with email? Are you B2B? Are you B2C? Are you a mixture of B2B and B2C? You should see that pop up there. Go ahead and click it, and that should give you the best experience. But love to just know a little bit more about what type of marketers we have here. Give everybody a minute. Obviously, I'm B2B. Brian, how about you? What is your agency specialize in?
Yeah, we're largely skewed to the BDC side. So it looks like we've got, we're significantly outnumbered, but there's a few folks out there. And then we have a small amount and a decent amount actually that are doing both. So.
Okay, that's cool. That's awesome. And I think too, the other thing that's really important is this is super conversational. We want to hear your questions. We're here to answer your questions. We've got some talking points and some topics of conversation. If you don't have any great questions, but more than anything, we want to keep this really conversational. So let's see what we've got here. If we can get the poll popped up and see what our percentage of B2B and B2C is. I'm going to guess it's going to be heavy B2B. We've got 19 votes for B2B, 4 for B2C, and 7 for a mix. That's pretty good. Cool. Great. Yeah. Well, I always love to talk to B2B marketers because I do feel like the rules are like a little bit different for us. What do you think, Brian? What do you think's going on with B2B email that's a little different these days?
Yeah, I think that, generally what we find is that for our clients that, a lot of the B2C stuff is like, is certainly a lot more. It kind of has like the element where you really can do a little bit more fun things with it and you're trying to capture interest. Whereas like our B2B focused clients, it's a little bit more to the point and straight action oriented. But I think what we've found is that there's a lot of opportunity for both to take lessons from the B2B side and bring them to B2C and vice versa.
Sure. Yeah. I've always been a B2B email marketer my whole career, never had to do the fun stuff or got to do, I should say, the fun stuff that B2C gets to do. Sometimes I kind of try to like make fun things happen for myself anyway, just to keep things interesting. But I think one of the things that's always stood out to me going to email sessions, and I'd love to hear from you all in the chat if this is true for you as well, is that the advice that a lot of email panels give tends to be a lot more focused on B2C. And the piece of advice that I'm thinking of the most is this notion that I've heard for years and years and years, which is that really your 100% of your email marketing strategy should be opt-in. And I think what's really interesting over the years for me as a B2B email marketer is that if you would have said that to me 5 years ago, I would have said, no one is ever going to opt into a sales nurture. Like, it's just not going to happen. Nobody's ever filling out a form for a white paper and being like, you know what I would like? I would like to be pitched. That's just not realistic. But what I think is really interesting is that with a lot of the data privacy legislation, kind of starting with GDPR in 2018, has I think started to push even B2B into a space where we really do actually have to start thinking about what does an opt-in strategy look like across the board. What are you seeing with your clients on that?
Yeah, and it's funny how you mentioned that. It's actually kind of true on the consumer side too. People aren't necessarily chomping at the bit to sign up, even if it's a brand they're loyal to getting their email to be communicated. And so, I think that's a good area where a lot of like our B2C tricks I'm seeing be applied more on the B2B side. So, thinking through for our big brand clients, they're oftentimes doing setting up on their site different like capture points of where they're going to capture people, provide us your information, take a quiz, that type of thing. Obviously, it's a little bit more difficult to have that. They have a little bit more like creative ways to play with on the consumer side. but we're seeing a lot of those same tricks. So like, really thinking through the site in terms of like, okay, if we're offering white papers, let's make sure we're capturing email as part of that, and maybe gatekeeping content that might have been, public previously, and make sure that, maybe they need to provide their email and opt in to receive that communication moving forward. That those types of tips and tricks we're seeing kind of across the system.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I feel like I've had a lot of conversations lately with B2B email marketers. And again, please unmute yourself, ask questions, chime in, put something in the chat. I think that, what's really interesting to me as a B2B email marketer is I've had a lot of conversations in the last year or so about what type of currency an email address might be, right? So like, I think of an email address as like, this is my way of paying for something. Giving you my email is my way of like, sort of giving you $5 for something. And if I'm going to give that money to you, then I really want to make sure that I'm getting something valuable in return. And if all you're doing is regurgitating your blog content via newsletter, like that's not really compelling enough for me to give you my email address. I can go find that on my own. So super interesting what you're saying, I think, Brian, about like, is it quizzes? Is it self-evaluations? Is it a webinar, for example, right? Where I can only access it by providing some sort of currency. Ariel's making a great point here where B2C tends to lure that subscription with like a, some kind of discount code. That's so much harder for us in B2B because I can't be like I'm in professional services. I can't say like, subscribe to our newsletter and we'll give you 25% off your audit. That's just not going to work. So we do kind of have to think a little bit more about like, what is the currency? What is the reciprocity for a B2B email address? Curious if any B2B email marketers here have anything that they're doing that they would like to share that's above and beyond white paper download or newsletter subscriptions where they're capturing email addresses. Anybody have anything good? Thinking icon. I know. Okay. We've been trying to do a lot of self-evaluations, right? So like, how can I help you do half the work of our selling team by also getting a response? Like, it's almost like a mutual qualification, right? So like, can I give you a survey that both tells you if you're a fit for me and me if you're a fit for us, right? So that's kind of a fun strategy. Event exhibitions. Oh yeah. Number one way of getting some relevant and interested leads. Sure. I think it's always harder for people to say no when they're looking you in the eyeballs. What do you think, Brian? Are you seeing anything really cool happening in your B2B clients?
Yeah, a lot of like the ideas. I really like the webinar, and I think what we tend to find is that there's like a good ready-made touch points around that too. So like if we know that there's like a webinar or event coming up, making sure that we've not only thought through like how can we capture as wide an audience as possible, but thinking through a journey that could live on the back end of that, making sure that we're communicating to them and personalizing that based off of what information they provided or their engagement post. So I think those are a lot of the big texts we see our clients doing, and some of the I think a lot of it has been positioned as like quizzes, but I do like the like self like evaluation. I like that piece a ton too, and thinking through, okay, like how can we learn more, but also have the context, thinking through, okay, how am I set up here?
Yeah, there's some other really good ones. Several years ago, I worked for a software company, and Aram here has an idea about doing an ROI calculator, and we did that. That was really successful. But that kind of speaks to pain points, right? And I almost feel like there's a directional here where is the reciprocity of your email address, can you help me solve a pain point that I have, whether it's a pricing pain point or a fit pain point? Like, can you help me save time? Can you help me save money? Can you provide information to me that I otherwise couldn't find? And those feel like some really great ways to get that email address. Diogo's got a good one too, which I love, private events, right? Is there some kind of like dangling, carrot that you can put in front of somebody? But if it's a private event, it's probably something that, they haven't necessarily considered or they haven't tried before that they've always been wanting to. Okay, so we've got a question in the chat from Ariella. What are your thoughts on getting people's personal email addresses when they sign up instead of their business email addresses? Some gated content will not unlock for a personal email, but it still gets the person even if it doesn't have the value. Ooh, I have opinions on this, Brian, but I'm going to let you go first.
Yeah, well, so I'm very curious to hear your opinions, just especially given your focus here. We do find that they're like for our clients where we get personal versus their business is that there's almost like treat them as two different subscribers. We definitely see different behavior patterns, not only in terms of like what they choose to engage with, but also like when they're browsing. And so like in terms of like send time optimization and stuff like that, we see that there's a much different behavioral expectations around that. So I think, I'm definitely curious to understand you more because I'm sure you've done a ton more digging on this.
I have two reasons that I'm totally fine with it. The first reason is because if you're early funnel and you're in the research phase and you choose to give me your personal email address, I want you to be as engaged and receive as much information from me as you possibly want. Now, if I'm trying to do some kind of like, outbound one-to-one sales strategy, I probably don't want your Gmail address because that's a recipe for a spam complaint. If I'm like, ooh, I have brian.mckenna@gmail.com. I hope that's not actually your email address. Maybe it is. I don't know. And I'm like, I'm going to put you into, an outbound one-to-one sales email tool like Salesloft or Salesforce's Sales Engage, right? And then I'm going to try to prospect you that way. I would strongly discourage that because I think that's invasive. But if you're like, you know what? I want to sign up for that private tasting event with my personal email address, or I'm interested in this webinar and I want to sign up with my personal email address. I think that's perfectly fine. And realistically, depending on the buyer profile, there might be some reasons why that person's using a Gmail address instead of their business address. Maybe they're thinking about changing jobs. Maybe they are thinking about you as a really solid thought leader. So I do this sometimes where I really want to maintain that point of contact with a company because of their thought leadership. So actually, MarTech's a great example. I'm subscribed to MarTech with my personal email address because I want to make sure that I'm receiving that communication and that information. And I want that point of continuity and I want to be able to access it on my personal time versus via my work email where I'm busy and I'm doing stuff. The other condition might be like board membership. So what if I'm a stakeholder, but I'm a board member and I want to have that on my personal email address because I don't want it mixed with my business email address. It's a different part of my life. I think the other one that is interesting to me is when you are in B2B, and this is another reason why I would personally welcome this. When you're in B2B, sometimes you have certain types of roles that have high turnover. And it's like their decision. So you have, especially I think the higher up you get, you've got people who will go to a certain company for 2 or 3 years and they will work it. They'll do whatever it is that they want to do. If it's a CFO, for example, they'll get everything buttoned up, but they like an adventure. And so they're going to roll to a new company pretty quickly, right? So one of the best things is if you get one of those people, if you get one of those people who like that high turnover type of lifestyle. Ariel is talking about that in startups. True, in startups too, right? Those are decision makers. And if you get them to love you at one company, you just sold yourself like 5 deals down the road, right? But you have to have a way to stay in touch with them. And it's not going to be their business email address, in which case I love to have their personal email address. Like if I have a CFO personally give me their private email information, like that's gold, So yeah, I think it's a really interesting perspective. And it's interesting because I think sometimes people get a little bit like blinders on with it. And they're like, oh no, I only want a business address. I want to filter out all the personal addresses, but there's some real value in those personal addresses if you think about them in the right way.
100%. We actually have a client in the manufacturing space that works with a lot of trade professionals, and that's a big piece for them. Is what they found is that oftentimes those individuals might work at 2 different contracting jobs. So they might have individual work emails at each of those, but you want to have that relationship with that individual independent of where they're taking their contracting work from it. So I think that's a really great way to think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alicia's got a great point here too, which is match rate with business addresses on platforms like LinkedIn. I've also struggled with that throughout my career where I'm like also a bad offender. I don't ever put my company email address into my LinkedIn profile because I don't want people to spam me with it. So that's actually a really good point. If you're only looking for business email addresses and then trying to match those profiles on LinkedIn, your match rate's going to be really low. Same for Google Ads. Actually, and I know this is an email conversation, so we won't go down this rabbit hole. This is like why a couple of years ago, we started moving most of our digital advertising to an account-based marketing platform, because it sort of like makes it agnostic of like what email address you may have on file, or if you have the wrong person, or if that person has, turned over to a new role, you can still target the right title at the right company. But that's an interesting point as well. Yeah. That's super interesting. Well, I think that part of the challenge here is that, especially in business email, we've sort of thought that we were agnostic of a lot of changes, especially around like data privacy or some of the legislative changes that have been happening. Now, that's not true if you're already beholden to GDPR, but if you're largely US based, you've probably felt pretty safe from a lot of the email changes until recently with CPRA. Are your clients starting to think a little bit more about data privacy, the ones that are on the B2B side?
So for most of our clients that are on the B2B side, they're still probably parts of larger brands. So they oftentimes are going to like the most stringent credential or like requirements, regulations. And so we do, I would say almost all, maybe a client here or there haven't fully like prepped for GDPR. So that's kind of we sit in a unique space in that our clients are kind of that's their governing policy across their work. So even for our B2B clients there, but certainly I know that it's been an adjustment for a lot of other B2B marketers.
Sure. And now we've got the new changes from Google and Yahoo. React with your emoticon, all of you, your feelings on that. Yes. Big changes. Yeah, but I think what's really interesting to me about those changes is that, again, because it's Gmail and Yahoo, I feel like the narrative has been among email marketers in the community has been, oh, this is really more of a B2C thing. We don't really have to worry about it too much in B2B. I'm curious, though. I actually think the impact to B2B email marketers is probably quite a bit more significant than many of them think. Are you having conversations like that with your clients around deliverability and those changes to Gmail and Yahoo?
Yeah, and I would say that we've had most of our conversations with our B2B clients around this, mostly because the B2C world, this has been like kind of the norm. If anything, there's just more clarity around this. I think our clients on the B2C side have known for a while, you need to have good practices in place to manage those spam rates, to make sure you're only sending the delivered folks, or to engage folks. I think where our conversations have often started with our B2B clients is they'll start by saying, oh, but Gmail is only such a small portion of our list. I don't think we're going to have any issues. And what we need to remind them is, it might be their corporate address, but they might be using, Gmail on the back end to manage their deliverability and inboxing. And so they kind of just reminding them, you do need to worry about this has been a lot of our conversations.
100% agree. And I think that is the biggest gap in knowledge that I have seen in the B2B email community is that lack of understanding that we're not talking about at gmail.com. We're not talking about brian.mckenna at gmail.com. We're talking about if you're using Google for Business to power your corporate email, then you are also impacted. Yeah, that's a really tricky one. That's one. I think there's been a lot of, I would say blowback about, what that means, and a lot of sadness. I think it actually sets us up to be better email marketers. I'm not that upset about the changes because I think what it does is it ensures that you're keeping your list active. I think it ensures that you're being responsive to your community needs. And I think it pushes, especially those of us in B2B, into hey, we really do need to be opt-in. We really should not be sending emails to people who have not specifically asked for those emails, which is still a pretty common practice in B2B email to do that sort of behavior. Yeah. Chelsea's got a question here. Anyone finding Yahoo as a 3/9 timeframe having increased their scrutiny on file size? We're starting to see a higher spam placement rate. I could see that being a component for sure. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, and I forget the exact number for Yahoo, but I know for Gmail it's like 5,000 sends is like where if you're sending more than 5,000 is the threshold for Gmail. And so I'm guessing, like you said, Natalie, I'm guessing that this is part of their larger changes. And so if you are sending over that volume and may have run into a spam rate that's above their threshold, that this seems like a candidate that they're likely being dinged for that new policy.
And file sizes, even predating the Gmail and Yahoo changes, file size has always been a big impact for deliverability. I know that I've worked with a couple of email marketing tools that will flag you for file size when you do your pre-flight renderings. They'll say, hey, this email's too big. But I do think that's something else I see a lot in B2B. I know I receive quite a few of these emails where you'll get this, like, I'm sure it looks beautiful on a poster, email header image that's like 1,900 pixels wide, that somebody's gone into their platform and tried to like manually resize it, and Outlook's just like, whatever, I don't care. You're showing it as a poster, right? So I do think that file size is something to be mindful of. And I'm trying to remember the exact kilobyte number. It's in the hundreds. It's much smaller than you might think it is. If we've got a deliverability expert on here who's got that number off the cuff, but there is a recommended file size for your entire email that does help keep you in the deliverability realm. Anybody got that number handy? Pop quiz? I can see it. Like, I can see the numbers, but they're all jumbled. Maybe I've got some form of numeric dyslexia here. So anyway. All right. Let's see. Let's do another poll. What do you think? Okay, let's do this one. Thank you, Ariella. Under 200 kilobytes. That sounds about right. It's much smaller than most people think it is. Let's talk about question here. Ready? What is your biggest email marketing challenge right now? Let us know. You're going to see that pop up. Click that green pop-up box. A new poll has been launched. It's going to be your best user experience. And let's take a look at the answers. Brian, I am going to ask you specifically, what is your biggest email challenge right now?
Yeah, I would say on our end, what we hear from our clients is that they, in general, would like to be doing significantly more personalization in their emails. And the biggest limitation is the data infrastructure to be able to necessarily fulfill on that. So I think that's kind of our most common, certainly on the B2C side, is that, they know they need to be doing more personalization, but they don't know where to start and don't have the right infrastructure to be fulfilling on it.
That is so interesting. What else I think is really interesting about personalization and email? And this is one of those, it hasn't been vetted out in the courts yet, is if you take a look at some of the data privacy legislation, there is a suggestion there that people would have the right to opt out of data points that would allow us to personalize. Now, I think I'm probably saying that in a convoluted way, but if it's really interesting, if you dig in on some of those state-specific, United States-specific data privacy rules, there's some really confusing language in there that basically is I can opt out of your ability to personalize content to me. And one of the things that I have as a question to myself, because the law has not settled this, is where and how does that imply what we can do with email? Can I change an image based off of the data point that I have about you if you ask to not be personalized, right? If you're hey, I don't want you to know that about me, or I want to hide that data point, then how can I provide a better email experience for you? It's a really interesting landscape right now where I think you've got if you poll people, you get this one poll that's people really want to receive personalized communications from brands, right? But on the other side, you've got data privacy legislation, which is don't track your information, don't capture data points. And I'm do people understand that's how we do it? We have to capture the data point in order to personalize the content for you. I don't know. I don't know if anybody else is seeing that, but it's one that I think about routinely.
Yeah, certainly. And, and how does that work? Where does that end? Abandoned cart messages or stuff that are truly valuable. A product comes back in stock, someone asks to be notified, or they're just updating their preferences. Does that bleed into if they only want to receive certain emails, does that count as personalization? So yeah, I think it's a gray area. when we're leaning towards the courts for figuring it out, it's never a good position to be in. So
right, exactly. Because I have a suspicion that a lot of those legislators don't really understand email marketing.
100%, yeah. Or does a password reset count? There's a lot of personalization in that. And
that's right. There certainly is, right. And the other one that puzzles me is just thinking through like, well, how do I keep you from getting recreated in my system, right? You know, like what is the right data point that you can use to make sure that Brian, when he opts out of communication or asks to be deleted, doesn't get recreated, right? Like it's not quite so simple to be like, and what if you change jobs? Do I still owe you the ability to be opted out? How am I going to know it's you and that you're at a different job? So there are a lot of unsettled questions, I think, here. Okay, so we're starting to get some results back. Interestingly, it looks like most of the people here are most challenged with a lack of understanding from their organization on what email is and does. Do you find that surprising, Brian?
No, I think, and I answered that one of the options as well. And I think that is a common aspect of the work we do for our clients, is that there's also some element of like client management and helping our contacts at our clients with, portraying what is their overall expectations for email, having them buy in the full strategy. So I think that this definitely is unsurprising on the B2C end. It's actually kind of reassuring to see, given the audiences, that this is something that's common in the B2B space as well.
Oh, certainly. I would even argue more common in the B2B space, because in the B2B space, the perception of email is that it's basically a free advertising tool. Why not just pull all those people into a dynamic list and blast them, And then I think that in B2B is where you have the conversation. I spent 5 years at an agency as well that specialized in email marketing, Brian. So I know I've heard this from a lot of B2B clients as well, where it's like, well, why can't we just think that those people are a great fit? We think they're a great fit. So of course they're a great fit. So just pull them all into a dynamic list and blast them. And of course, that's where you will get that term too, right? Like raise your hand if you've heard blast in the last year. Can't we just send a blast out? Just like blast that email. Oh my God, it's nails on a chalkboard for me. Every time somebody's like, hey, let's send a blast. I'm like, we are not in like rocket science. Like we don't blast. There's no blasting.
Yeah, no, and that's like, even with our clients on the B2C side, so much of it is like, we're constantly trying to recommend a balanced approach of like, so this is our most loyally engaged segment. We're going to need to send a subset just to those folks, just to like can keep them engaged and not be over sending to everybody else. And the common refrain is we want to send every email to as many people as possible. So it's always that push pull.
Are we ready to have the conversation as email marketers that list size is not the most important metric? Like I don't actually care about how many people are on my list. I would rather have people who want to be on the list than I would a very large list of people who don't even understand why they're there. I know I always tell my team when they're like, well, is that an email we can send? The number one thing I say is, are they going to be confused or upset when they receive it? And if the answer is yes, then do not send it. Like there should be like some sort of understanding when you receive an email of, oh, I understand I am receiving this because of whatever. You should be able to puzzle it out. And if you can't puzzle it out, then the most likely behavior you're going to get is somebody's going to be like, and mark as spam. So yeah, I think that dives into list size, because there still is that like narrative of like more better, but that's not true. I mean, even with Gmail and Yahoo, I think that 2-year activity metric that they're looking for, right? Like your inbox has to have been active in the last 2 years. And you think about what that means for us as email marketers. It's not easy. Like, I don't know if you've been active with your email address or not. All I know is if you've been active with me or not. Right. And so because of that, like I have to also additionally say, hey, list size might be something that leadership is looking for or asking about. But there's a conversation that you have to have with leadership to say, while you may think that having a big list is good, we need to be monitoring and actively removing people now who have not been active for 2 years with us. Because if they haven't, even if they've opted in, like it used to be, I think you could probably just let that like kind of float for a bit. Like I know there was like a big difference of opinion among email marketers about whether or not to run opt-in campaigns or actively remove people who were not engaged. I think I think that Gmail and Yahoo have kind of settled that debate. Now it's like, no, you really do need to remove people who have not been active for 2+ years. Yep. Even if you think they may re-engage at some point, like you need to remove them because the deliverability risk is just too great now. Are you having that conversation, Brian, about opt-in strategies now or list cleanliness?
Certainly. And I think really where our conversations are is it's also a muddled picture with the Apple iOS 15 updates from 2 years ago now at this point. You think these people are opening, and even that is a bit of a noisy picture. So a lot of our work with our clients is building in like backup ways to determine, is this really an engaged person? Because obviously the gap between an open and a click, we see, if we see 30% on an open rate, that's, pretty, at this point, kind of like average on the B2C side, because those numbers are inflated, but we're still seeing, 1 to 3% on a click rate. And so like, if there's certain people that are opening those emails, they are, but you can't identify them. And so, it's just a noisier and noisier picture for us to be muddling through.
That is such a great point about that conflation of Apple Mail privacy protection with like Gmail and Yahoo's 2-year deliverability metric for activity. The conversation that email opens are largely not reliable. For us in B2B, like you should have been having a conversation long ago because we've got like dual pressures, right? Like Apple Mail is like overinflating email opens, but Outlook has always underinflated them because if you don't download images, then it doesn't trigger as an open rate. So like if you're in B2B, you might as well like throw a dart at a number and be like, that's our open rate. Like that's probably more reliable than like actually trying to report on what your email marketing platform's telling you. But, Brian, I think something that's really interesting is that maybe this is going to push more marketers toward a true marketing automation platform that has some kind of cookie tracking associated to website tracking, landing page traffic, more metrics beyond just opens and clicks, like, more of an ESP might, simply because those additional metrics off of a cookied email address might give you some better reporting on who's truly active and who's not.
Yep, and some of that is trying to like isolate the people that we have a good sense that they're using mail privacy. So it's just a very noisy picture, and I think to your point, it's trying to use each of those tools that we can. But it's also I saw Chelsea put a comment in there. Transaction history is great. It's certainly giving us another picture. But what we see is that that those people, even if they're buying from us, might not be an engaged email subscriber. They might be buying, and I think there was a question up above about SMS. And so I think that's like, it's leading to us really needing to approach this as a like true cross-channel marketing experience. And so really thinking through at each point, we're going to do our best to like understand, these are the limitations. Here's who we can estimate are continue to be engaged, but making sure that it really is like an integrated approach. And so I think to that question around SMS, we view them very much as like they need to be integrated fully into our thought process. When we're thinking through journeys and marketing automations, SMS is a key piece of that larger picture. And similarly, when we're putting together like the blast, I'll use the term again, a strategy in terms of the calendar, SMS, and even social are like a key component. So making sure that we're really thinking through all of the elements and delivering an integrated approach.
Definitely. Chelsea's got a great question in the chat here about balancing the politics of education on email. Wow. I mean, Brian, I'd be curious to hear, because I'm sure you're doing a lot of educating even to a certain degree as am I, because I think the challenge that we have as email marketers is that we're sort of tossed into the same bucket as social media. Isn't it something anyone can do? Why do you have to have a specially trained person who's doing that, right? I feel for social media marketers when they get that narrative of like, oh, well, just have your 20-year-old intern niece do it or nephew do it because like surely all young people know social media. I think email kind of like falls into that same bucket when you're thinking about corporate strategy. Is it's like, well, can't anyone send an email? I really think the education has to be, this is a specialized skill set. And I think when you do bring to the table, Chelsea, at least in my experience, actual articles and in MarTech's a great resource for this, actual articles that are like, hey, so you are aware, because of course they probably aren't, because who follows email marketing changes that's not an email marketer? You've got to bring some of that to the table and say, hey, as of, February 1st, Gmail and Yahoo have made some significant changes. I have the benefit of using, hopefully no one from Salesforce is on the call. I use Pardot / Marketing Cloud Account Engagement. Don't slap my hand, Salesforce. But like one of the really nice things about that platform is that it does give you a breakdown of inboxes for each email send. And I know there are lots of other platforms out there that do that as well. But taking some of that data directly to leadership when you're having that conversation, whether it's an article that says like, hey, Apple mail privacy, basically force opens and emails, so opens aren't reliable. Oh, and by the way, based off of the metrics from our marketing automation platform, 60 to 90% of our database is opening with Apple mail privacy is a great way to kind of like change that narrative. Similarly with like Gmail and Yahoo, I know Pardot at least will tell me how many people are using Gmail, even if they're not using @Gmail. So Pardot will say, hey, it's 30 to 40% of every send that you have is using Google for Business and or gmail.com. And it's a really great way to have that conversation to say, look, this is the percentage of our list that's going to be impacted, and we need to be responsive to these changes. Here's the article for you to read if you have more questions. But that's been a great way, at least in my experience, to help people understand the impacts and changes. The other one being, of course, that deliverability is not just your marketing automation platform. It could be the entirety of your send. So like anything coming from @yourbusiness.com could be negatively impacted if you wound up on a list, say at Spam House. So I think that's the other part that like tends to get people's attention. They're like, wait, what? And I'm like, yes. So for example, the CEO could try to send an email and it would not go through. And we're like, then people, I think, start to pay attention. Brian, do you have conversations like that as well? How do you manage the politics there?
Yeah, and I think coming back to like the conversation around like a lot of ours are like, again, trying to get our clients to like rethink their overall send approach and thinking through like, can we build more loyal segments and not be sending everything to the full list, like I said before. And so a lot of what's helped us in those conversations is walking them through, okay, we're going to pull back on the volume of sends. Our expectation is that you're going to see a dip in like opens and clicks, but it's going to be far less than you expect. And really what you're going to see is those people, so much percentage are coming from those loyal engagers. And then what we're going to enable that to do is that we're not going to be over communicating to those people that want to hear from you a little bit less. And what we're going to see is, when we send out those larger emails, you're going to see a lift. And so really viewing that as something where we want to make sure we have the framework in place to be able to report on that and show them and walk them through that, so that when, a month in, you're saying, okay, we're moving X% into your loyally engaged through these strategies, and we're seeing some drop off, but the net impact is you're going to be, delivering all of your emails into the inbox, most importantly, and we are not really seeing a major drop off. That's been our biggest ally. So if we can get that foundational reporting in place and walk them through that through the whole process, it's been our biggest ally in that.
Yeah. There's another impact here that I will give full credit to Alice Lee for bringing to my attention. It was not one that I had considered until I saw a keynote presentation she gave last year about this, but there's an environmental footprint as well to kind of letting your email list and your send policies be lax, right? So she actually put together a calculator for the carbon footprint of your email sends, and it's fantastic. I wish I could find the link to it right here. But it was kind of like how to do the math on your environmental footprint. And depending on the type of company that you're working for, some companies care quite a bit about that metric. Obviously, some care less, but some care quite a bit about that environmental footprint and how you're being responsive to it. The short version is she's basically recommended a two-step strategy for email marketers who are concerned about their environmental footprint. The first being, as a recipient of emails, have you cleaned out your inbox and have you unsubscribed from things that you do not actively engage with, not because, you're annoyed by the messaging or the content, but simply because of the file size, especially in B2C where you tend to get more image-heavy emails. Those have a significant impact on server load that can significantly increase the environmental footprint of that email. And then similarly, if you're an email marketer like many of us are, have you considered using that as a talking point in the necessity to shrink your list size and in the necessity to really be considerate about file sizes or image sizes, or maybe not sending something that's super image heavy if it's not going to be valuable, because that's just extra server load that you're contributing to what would essentially be a negative environmental footprint. I had not thought much about the server load until that discussion, but I think it's a really interesting and valuable one for us as email marketers to consider. Is that something that you've given any thought to, Brian, or has anyone else here thought about their environmental footprint? Excuse me.
It's funny. I read the same article and I thought it was like really a different way. I hadn't thought about it either prior to that. I think on the B2C side, especially with bigger brands, we've kind of arrived at the same point from a different standpoint. So I think like a lot of what we do with a lot of our clients is they may be sending, fully image-based emails prior to working with us. And so a lot of our onboarding process is getting them set up with like a dynamic template that is text-based. And a lot of that is being done more for like best practices and for accessibility and all those components, but it does have that same net impact of where we're reducing the file size. And I think I think it does have a good impact from an environment standpoint. It's obviously very important, but I think really it's also the additional benefits from a usability standpoint as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting. Well, I know we've got probably about 5 more minutes, 10 more minutes. How much more time do we have? About 5 or 10 more minutes? 10 more minutes. All right. We've got a couple more polls we could do, but I'm curious before we open any of those, does anybody else have any questions they want to drop into the chat? We've got an opportunity to change the conversation if you want. Otherwise, we've got some questions about data we could talk about. We could go down a couple of different rabbit holes. Where do you guys want to take this conversation? Ooh, ideal email frequency rate. I have opinions. Brian, I have opinions. Jerry wants to know, what is the ideal email frequency rate?
So on our end, I would probably say that it's very much subscriber driven. So this is kind of where I'm approaching. We approach it for our B2C clients is, at the end of the day, like we have clients that send daily, sometimes more frequently than that, and sometimes that are more weekly or bi-monthly, that type of frequency. And really, what we found is even within those like framework is that there's a mixture of clients or subscribers that are going to want to hear from you less frequently than they're sending today. So I think in general, some of it is driven by like how much content there is to be driven, what those practices are to be sending out relevant content. And really what we spend our time focusing on is like, how can we do more within that framework of identifying the people that want to hear from you everything you're sending, and who are those people that probably want to hear from you, a third of what you're sending or potentially even less than that.
I am guilty of being the person who subscribes to B2C emails for the discount code. That is 100% me. And like, I even, because I'm an email marketer, sometimes game the system, I admit, where I'm like, I'm going to put that in my cart and I'm going to abandon it. Like, I have a whole intention of buying it. I'm just going to abandon it. I'm bad. I'm sorry. B2C email marketers out there, you're going to see my name on the list and be like, delete her, take her off.
Well, we still will count that as attribution. So as long as you click through the email, we might be taking advantage of you too.
So true. That's so true. I'm out here just making your email numbers look good. But I do think, though, to the question of send frequency, there are several brands to which I have subscribed, and they're predominantly clothing brands where, I kid you not, they'll send me an email every single day. And I'm like, I'm not going to buy a sweater every day. I don't do that. Like, that's not, does anybody buy a sweater every single day? Like, who does that? Right. I could not financially afford to buy a sweater every single day. That feels excessive to me. I do think there's something to be said about the brand recognition of dropping just your name in the inbox, but daily feels excessive. And I think that is like the one where, Jerry, I don't think there are any hard and fast rules here. And I do agree with Brian that I think it's very much like consumer driven, and it's got to sort of be driven by the recipient. I do think there are some that we could say are not good, right? So like the far ends of the spectrum, daily's bad. Daily, like nobody wants an email every day. But on the other end of the spectrum, you can go too long and people will forget that they subscribed or that you exist. And there is a deliverability impact that is a negative impact if you wait too long between sends. So, I mean, I would personally, again, personal opinion, I would not send any less frequently than once a month. I think quarterly is risky. I know there are a lot of people who do quarterly, and there are even some sends that I know that we do that are quarterly. I would say quarterly is probably too long to wait. Monthly feels like a good happy medium to me. Weekly, if you've got enough relevant content, but I think in B2B, it really boils down to, and probably in B2C as well, it really boils down to, are you sending this email because you want them to do something, or are you sending this email because there's actually something interesting that they would probably want to know about? And if the answer is the latter, then I think that you're probably in an okay spot. So, for example, MarTech is this way. I know we at CBIZ, we have a CFO-facing newsletter that's this way, that it goes out every other week, but it's news-based, right? There's like something has happened in the news and you want to know about it. And I think in that regard, you could probably make an argument if it's a news-based type email and you had enough fresh news, you probably could send it daily. But I think that it's really going to be, if you're a clothing brand, right? And I see Beth saying there's new drops on Sunday, like that's a great way to do it, right? Like you've got to tell me something new. You can't just be like, here's another sweater and another sweater and here's another sweater and more sweaters and there's all the sweaters. Like I saw them. Thank you. Like I probably clicked through the first time and looked at all the sweaters. So unless there's a sweater I haven't seen, please do not send me any more information about the new sweaters. So I think that's a tricky one. But as long as it's something that you're like, this is something you have not seen and I want to ensure that you have seen it, then you can probably send that email.
Yeah. And I think to your point there, I think we have clients that have list size and have enough going on where like they might be sending an email daily, but as an individual recipient, to your point, like no one wants to hear about sweaters every day, but that same company might send candles and they might have, an email going out today about sweaters, an email going out later this week about candles. And there's probably not a ton of people that want to hear about every single one of your product. So an email is going out, but that doesn't mean that, I guess what we preach is let's make sure that the person that is actually interested that there's about the sweaters is receiving that email versus the person that's receiving the email about candles is receiving that one. So an email could go out, but that's where we're heading with our clients is, okay, let's make sure that we're meeting our subscribers where they're at with their expectations as well.
And that is something that I worry about with regards to some of the deliverability changes about email activity, because the only way that we have as email marketers is to identify your activity with us and not your activity overall. I actually hang out on email lists for long periods of time within activity. Here's what I've got a great example. Shutterfly. I don't buy something from Shutterfly very often, but I don't want to not be on the list because they send out great discount codes. And when I do want to buy, I want to make sure that I have those discount codes. But it's like so infrequent. It's like 18 months will go by before I'll buy anything, if not more. And I think I'm on like 4 years right now. Actually, come to think of it, I think they may have removed me. Now that I'm thinking about it, I don't think I actually have seen an email from them in a while, but there are some emails out there that I will purposefully stay on because the buying cycle between is so long for me. I don't want to not know about it, but I also am not going to buy it regularly. Running shoes, I think, is another great example. I don't buy a new pair of running shoes every month, but when I do want to buy a new pair of running shoes, I would actually like to be on the email list so that I know what my options are, or so that I remember the brand. I love your puppy there, Lauren. So I think the dog has a question. Is it about Chewy's email strategy?
That's great. Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think this is also where at least the people that I was speaking with around the iOS 15 rollout, it was that was our biggest concern. So we do so much to try and read and react so that we're not over communicating to people. So at the end of the day, we understand that, and what we're preaching to our clients is we want to be delivering content that people are actually engaging with. And so I think we're also take very seriously privacy. But this was a change that it, to some extent, prevented us from reading those cues. And so to your point, Natalie, I would imagine previously you would have continued to engage with those emails, but largely opened those emails and didn't click on them until you're at that time to be buying. And so I think that is one of the unintended impacts of this is that you just, you don't have as much of that relationship and you're not able to read and react because that open has become such a noisy picture. And so
that's true. And it actually makes me sad when I get unsubscribed. Like I always am like a little like, you didn't want me, like you didn't believe me, like I was gonna come back and buy, you didn't believe me. Like I take it personally, I should say. But maybe I shouldn't. Maybe that says more about me than it does anything else. All right. Well, there was another great question a little bit higher up, actually related to Molly's great comment about like when people opt in, maybe give them an option for frequency. Let me scroll back up here. One question here about preferences centers, and I'm trying to find your Ira. Yeah, Ira. So thoughts on email preferences centers. I actually think these are related topics, send frequency and preference centers. I know my personal opinion on a preference center, especially because I think this is something we haven't touched on, but if you have not done this already, you probably want to do it soon. Would be an opt-in or a re-opt-in campaign as these deliverability changes have taken foot, right? You really want to make sure that the people who are on your list at this point really truly want to be there. I think the risk is just high if you have a lot of people who either are on there because they never opted in or because the data synced them there or because they were engaged 5 years ago, but you haven't cleaned up. Is a really good opportunity for you to go through an opt-in strategy or a re-opt-in strategy. However, that ties directly to your preference center. Before you ever consider that, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at your preference center and maybe share it with some friends who have no idea that you do email and just be like, would you subscribe to any of these things? Because if they're not worded correctly, if the value is not clearly stated, if it's not very clear what they're going to be receiving, I think your preference center can actually do quite a bit of damage to your sender profile. What do you think, Ryan?
Yeah, I think the two things, this is something we often will set up with our clients. I think the pieces that we warn our clients about going up front is that almost nobody will like go through that process once they're on the list. They don't voluntarily give you more information a ton. And so we use it as a valuable tool, but we definitely recommend having like other systems in place to like capture inferred preferences as well, just because, the percentages of people that will go through a preference center are very small. The other piece that we also make sure is like, if you're including that, people are going to get very upset if you're not honoring it. So if they say that you want to hear from them, they only want to hear from you for certain things, and then you decide to send to your full list because you've got a promo that you think is going to crush it, people are going to react very negatively to that. So I think that is, one of the things we're also like making sure is like, if we're setting this up, let's set it up in such a way that you're going to honor it for your own subscribers.
So about 7.5 years ago, my email mentor made a comment that there should really be no condition in which you ever send to everyone on your list. Like it should just never happen. That was a strong opinion. He was like, there's never an opportunity for a send all. It's a recipe for disaster.
Exactly.
I don't know if that's true. And there are probably people here who would disagree, but that comment really stuck with me. Great. So it sounds like we have just actually right about done. Thanks everyone so much for coming. I guess we'll go ahead and wrap up. I think we may even be a little bit over. It's been a great conversation. Thank you, Brian, for joining. This has been really fun. Thanks again, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the MarTech.org podcast. Don't forget to sign up for our newsletter at martech.org/newsletters.